I'm just going to hope to share as much of this really exciting and fun way of working with you all today in the hour. It's going to go by really fast. So first, I'd like to just start by sharing a story, which is of a person who was trying to get to New York, and he got in his car and he's driving along the freeway, and he takes an exit, and pretty soon 4 lanes becomes 2 lanes, and a paved road becomes a dirt road, and pretty soon he's a little confused. He's bumping along, and there's potholes, and he's going through. It just sort of looks like farms in all directions, and this doesn't look like New York City at all. So he pulls over and he sees a farmer out in his field, and he says, "Sir, excuse me, can you help me get to New York City?" And the farmer takes this blade of grass out of his mouth and says, "If I was you, I wouldn't start from here." So with metaphors of movement, we are going to be eliciting our unconscious metaphors for our problems or stuck states, and using this insight to understand why our attempted solutions aren't working and what might actually work better. So I'll share another story, which is supposedly a true story, and if anyone can verify it, I'd be curious. As the story goes, when they were settling Australia, they decided it would be nice to bring some English songbirds down to Australia, and so they did so. In the first year, it was great. They had all these nice songbirds making these beautiful songs, and then it started to get colder, and they all flew south for the winter, and of course ended up in Antarctica, which was not where they were expecting to end up. So those two stories really represent, for me, what this metaphors of movement way of working is all about. Because basically, those birds were taking the farmer's advice. They were starting from somewhere where they weren't. And a lot of times in life, we wish we were starting somewhere else than where we're actually starting. But if we delude ourselves, or just are confused and think that we're starting somewhere where we're not, then there's no chance of ending up somewhere better. And the metaphors of movement process is just a brilliant way of really getting in touch with where we're actually starting. And we're all starting somewhere different. All of our lives are unique and have unique challenges and opportunities. And a lot of times we're in situations where we wish we were starting somewhere else and we could just be somewhere else. But the truth is that we're only in one place at one time, and to know where we're starting is the first step to getting somewhere better. And that's what this process is so brilliant at. So if I want to take a plane to Chicago, it's really important that I know that I'm starting in Denver. The odds of me getting the right ticket, if I don't know that, are very, very low. So in a moment, I'm going to be inviting you all to think about some situation where you in your life feel stuck or blocked or held back, bogged down, that sort of thing. And we'll explore it as a group. And these are the kind of metaphors that we hear in people's everyday language all the time, these little mini metaphors. And usually we kind of let it go and we pay more attention to all of the other words in the phrase, more that conscious mind part of it. But there's a lot packed in these little metaphors. And I hope by the end of today you'll get a sense that often within a tiny little metaphor like this, like I'm walking in circles, or I'm walking through quicksand, or I'm banging my head against a brick wall, all these little phrases that you hear in everyday language can actually give us more insight about somebody's experience than all of the other words surrounding it. So let me just give you a quick example of one of my metaphors when I was in this training with Andy Austin. So this whole methodology was developed by Andrew T. Austin. He's in the UK. And we're also bringing him to teach the advanced material later in 2020 in the spring. And he's a fabulous teacher. And so I was in a training with Andy learning this and exploring my metaphor. And the person I was working with said, So I chose a situation that I didn't like. I wanted to change it. And she asked me, okay, so the whole thing, what's it like? And so I, okay, that's an interesting question. I've never really thought about that before. And the initial thing that came to me was it was like I felt ungrounded. It was like my feet were kind of a few feet off the ground. So I said, well, it feels like I'm up in the air, like my feet are off the ground. And so she asked me a little bit more. Okay, so what's keeping you up in the air? And so I went and noticed, and I was like, okay, this sounds really weird to the conscious mind, but it's as if I'm hanging from a rope from the ceiling, and that's what's keeping me up in the air. And it actually seems like there's a bunch of 6-inch metal spikes underneath me too. So at this point, the person who was working with me in the workshop started to get really worried that we had some serious situation here, and maybe I should be committed to a psych ward or something like that, because this seemed pretty dire. Here I am hanging by a rope from the top of my head, and there's 6-inch spikes underneath, some sort of torture chamber scene or something like that. The interesting thing is that with these metaphors, so the problem situation that I had started with was actually something that I considered fairly mild. And so with these metaphors, the apparent severity of the metaphor doesn't seem to have any correlation with the apparent severity of the problem situation in real life. So anyways, that was one example of what it was like to me. To our left brain logical mind, that seems really weird. But to the right brain, the unconscious experience of what is it like, that's just what it's like, unfiltered by the conscious left brain, conform to culture and do what's culturally acceptable. So I encourage you all to just embrace your inner weirdness today, and in exploring your metaphors, and just see what it's actually like before we filter that into something that's understandable in everyday language to other people. So that's what it was like for me. So I'm just curious what it's like for you. So if you all think of some situation in your life where you feel stuck or blocked or held back, bogged down, going in circles, don't know which way to turn, banging your head against a wall, those sorts of things, in over your head. You can just think about this now. If you want to close your eyes, you can. That helps you just think about some situation like this. And as you just think about this whole situation, just the whole thing, what is it like? Just notice, what is it like? For me, the first thing that I was aware of was, oh, it's like I wasn't grounded, like my feet were above, off the ground. And then a little bit more began to emerge of what was holding me in that position, and perhaps what I was narrowly avoiding by being a little ungrounded. So for you, you can just notice, what is it like? Just notice what it's like for you. Carol, take it away. What's it like?
It's like there are so many things to look at, to choose from. I'm capable of probably doing any of the ones I'm considering, but I don't know which one to start with. So it's like this big collage that I don't know where to focus.
Okay, so it's like, so you'll notice the first stuff was all of the normal way of communicating, right? That was the non-metaphor, the way we usually talk. And then at the very end came the metaphor. It's like a collage that you don't know where to focus, right?
Right.
Okay, great. So anyone else share what it was like for you, the metaphor that came, if you got one. Some people don't get one right away. Okay, so Joe, why don't you go, and then Kathy.
Yeah. So for me, there's two bits to the metaphor. It feels like I'm stuck, like in a quagmire, like molasses, the thick syrup holding me back. But it also feels like what I'm trying to do is either over or on top of a big wall. And I just see this giant barrier.
Okay, so there's a barrier in front, and you're in this quagmire?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to make a little picture of that.
That looks
There we
like
are. And I don't know how to draw collage, but I'm going to just go like this, and that's a collage. So we've got yours on there. Okay, so Kathy, how about you?
Between the devil and the deep blue sea.
Oh, okay. And so where's the devil and where's the deep blue sea?
Oh yeah, good. Hmm.
Related to you.
Yeah, yeah. The deep blue sea is to the left and kind of in front, and the devil is to the right. Yeah, like yeah.
So the devil is more right than you are.
It could be said that that's true.
So we'll start getting into these idioms that come into play with this metaphor work that really makes it interesting. So I'm going to just draw the devil here. And okay, so that's my really quick devil and the deep blue sea right
there.
there.
It's a good devil.
Yeah, the sea could use some work. Okay, thank you. And then Steve Ryan.
Yes, what came up for me was being pulled back into the past, but then not being able to let go as well.
Okay, and so there we have some metaphor and some non-metaphor. So the pulled back is the metaphorical part. So what is that that's pulling you back?
It's just childhood history memories, things like that.
Okay, yeah. So there we're going outside into. Do you all notice that? One thing that's interesting about this process is dialing in just to the metaphorical part, which is the part that usually we ignore. You know, the dominant hemisphere, the left brain over here, you know, it really loves words, and it's the conscious mind. It can dominate and just kind of like loves talking and all the rest. And so with this work, it's a normal thing to come up with oftentimes a mix of metaphor and examples of the problem, or you know, past history or consequences of the problem, or even a diagnosis of the problem, or how it makes us feel. Those are all the ways that we're used to talking about our problems. So those tend to come out naturally, and that's fine. And then we just sort of, this is the one area where we go, okay, we're going to just actually ignore all of that and pay attention to the metaphor. So what I'd encourage you to do is just kind of notice for yourself, what is that like, that pulling backwards?
I can't really think of anything right now, but when I do, I'll raise my hand.
Okay, great. Sounds good. So anyone else who'd like to share the metaphor that just came up, go for it.
Yeah, so for me, it is like I'm blindfolded by like a handkerchief or like a bandana.
Okay, blindfolded by a handkerchief or bandana. Got it. I forgot to add myself up on here. I drew this out ahead of time. This is the one I shared earlier. There's me. Looks like a torture chamber, doesn't it? Okay, so anyone else want to just share a metaphor that just came to you?
Oh, this is Carol Mark. More about my metaphor, that collage seems to be constantly changing.
Okay, got it. Great. I added that in there. See, it's constantly changing now.
Hi, sorry about that. Turning one way and then the other, feeling kind of pulled, so I'm almost kind of rotating.
Okay, but it's turning one way and then the other.
Yeah.
Okay, and what's doing the pulling?
Some things demanding my attention, but I can't really tell you what they are. It's just the sense of being pulled.
Okay, yeah. So if we were going deeper, with a lot of these, it's just the entry point. So we're aware of the very beginning of the metaphorical experience. And if we had time to go deeper, we'd start to ask, okay, so what is that like, that being pulled? And I'll give you an example of somebody that I worked with. Interestingly, when she first walked in, she said, I know that I'm creating this myself. So she had this conscious mind understanding that somehow she was creating this problem. But that wasn't enough to fix it because she was coming to see me. And what she was dealing with, I won't go into the content, but it involved enough stress that her blood pressure was skyrocketing in the afternoons, and all of her different medications weren't enough to keep that under control. So this was a serious thing that she was working with. And so I said, and she started telling me about all the stuff that was stressing her out and going into all the details and stuff. And then at one point there was this little metaphor that's like I'm fighting, and then blah blah, and then she went into all the rest of the story. Instead of paying attention to all that story like we usually did, I ignored all of that and I just paid attention to that little metaphor. And I said, okay, so it's like you're fighting. What is that like? And she goes, oh, let me check. Well, it's like, and she said, well, actually, it's not so much like I'm fighting. It's like I'm running on a treadmill. And it's all I can do just to stay in one place. So there an interesting thing happened. She was used to describing it in terms of a metaphor that other people could understand, or a culturally kind of acceptable or common metaphor. But when she started to get more in touch with what it was actually like for her, she started to realize, oh, it's not actually that I'm fighting. There is a struggle there, but I'm not fighting someone else. It's that it's like I'm running on this treadmill and putting a lot of energy into it. And no matter what I do, I just stay in one place. And so I said, okay, so it's running on a treadmill. What kind of treadmill is that? And she closed her eyes and went inside, and she said, you know what? It's actually not like a treadmill. It's like a wheel. It's like I'm inside this wheel, and I'm just running, and it's all I can do to stay in one place. So again, she's getting more and more into her unconscious metaphorical experience of the problem, as opposed to the story that she's learned to tell other people, that other people understand. And that's one of the really fascinating things that we learn in the training, is how to get to that primary process experience metaphor, as opposed to the story that we've learned to tell that other people understand. So here she is, she's in a wheel. Probably you can guess what kind of a wheel this is. And she said, so I asked her a little bit more about this wheel, and she had some handles on it. And she said, in the bottom, there's sawdust, and it's like about a foot deep. So now you could probably have even more guesses about what kind of wheel this is. So I drew a picture like this. And I said, okay, so that's what it's like for you. And she said, yeah. And I said, well, do you have any idea about, well, first I delivered some of these idioms, which you'll also learn how to do, which helps deepen the experience for somebody, and it helps them get a sense that you really get their situation. So what I said was, I drew this picture and I said, okay, so you're basically looking forward to the same cycle repeating itself over and over again. And at first she didn't really like that idea, but there it is. It's right there in the picture. So she kind of realized, yeah, I guess I am looking forward to that. I don't want to be looking forward to that, but I am. And something I didn't mention was that she did say that she had two handles on each side. So I said, but you've got a handle on the situation, so you just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And she didn't like that idea. That wasn't very, very helpful. Or she didn't think that was very helpful. But I said, you're basically looking forward to the same cycle repeating itself over and over. This is something you look forward to. It keeps repeating. And it takes a lot of energy and effort. And no matter how much effort you put into it, it just gets worse. And she's nodding her head and like, yeah, this is really making sense. To give another example of how these idioms can work, I worked with somebody who I just said, okay, what is it like? And he said, well, it's like I'm walking around in circles. I'm just going in circles. And he said, well, it's like I'm standing on a square of concrete and I'm just walking in circles and I'm in the middle of no man's land. And then he said, oh, and it's kind of like there's this river behind me, but it stops. It ends right behind me. And there's just nothing in all directions, so I'm just going in circles. So I drew a picture like this, and I said, and I asked him also, which direction are you going in circles? And he said, counterclockwise. I said, okay, well, it seems to me that perhaps you've gone with the flow for a long time in your life, and maybe that worked quite well for a while. It didn't take a lot of effort, and you just went with the flow, and the only thing is now you've washed up at this particular place. The good news is that you have a firm foundation. You have a concrete understanding of where you are. He said it was concrete, this square that he was on. And so for the first time, you're grounded, and you actually can take steps. The only problem is you don't know what direction to take to go, and you don't know what steps to take. And so you're just walking in circles, and frankly, it's pretty counterproductive. And as I said that, these are all things that are just literally true of this metaphor, but they're also common idioms. And as I just reflected that back to him, he said, "Are you clairvoyant or something?" And to him and to people who experience this kind of process, to us, it's just it sounds kind of clever. And it's like, okay, those idioms match this situation. But to somebody who that is their situation, it feels like you completely understand what's going on, which is quite an interesting experience, because a lot of times people have spent their whole life with nobody understanding what it's actually like. And so this process can be a profound way of demonstrating a deep level of understanding with people's problems, where in some cases, nobody has ever understood what it was like. People try to offer suggestions and feedback and advice and all the rest, and nobody gets what it's actually like. Okay, let's take my example. This is somebody who uses his head to stay a little bit above it all. And in fact, this is somebody who uses his head to perhaps not really get the point that's there to get. And in fact, there's actually quite a few points that he's not getting right now. And another interesting thing about this is that he's definitely not grounded. He's a little bit above it all. He's just hanging out, but he's a little above it all. He's not grounded, and he's clearly not able to take any steps to get anywhere different than where he is right now. So he's kind of stuck a little bit up in the air. Oh, he's a little bit stuck up. So these are the kind of idioms that were reflected back to me in the situation, and that completely fits what I was working with. And it's an interesting thing, because when you can, from the outside, some of these things can seem a little bit like, oh, that might be a little insulting. My experience, and what people's experience it tends to be, is that when these idioms are being reflected back about their metaphor of what it's actually like, and somebody's actually understanding, possibly for the first time, what things are actually like, and they reflect back these idioms that are true of the metaphor, the experience is being really validated and like, yeah, that is true, actually. So from the outside, it can seem like some of these idioms are a bit insulting or that kind of thing. My experience in the situation was that's actually totally right on. And it's an interesting thing that in going into these metaphorical experiences, we can receive feedback in a different way than if somebody just came up to me and said, Mark, I think you're a little stuck up in this situation. Then the defenses would go up, right? It's a whole different experience when we elicit the metaphor and reflect back directly related to a metaphor like this. So with going back to this woman with the hamster wheel, she didn't call it a hamster wheel, but we all know what it is, right? There's wood shavings in the bottom, and it was red too. I don't know if I said that. So what I told her was, I asked her, so what do you think it is after I delivered the idioms? And she goes, yeah, okay, I really don't like this situation. I want to be somewhere else. So I asked her, do you have a sense of what's keeping this thing moving and circling? And she said, well, I have a sense that it's maybe something outside of it somewhere, but I can't see it because of the wheel. And I said, okay, well, it could be. Do you have any other ideas? And she closed her eyes and kind of went into the experience. And then she said, I have a feeling it's like hidden under those wood shavings somewhere. And I said, I have a feeling it's hidden under those wood shavings too. Do you have any idea what that might be? And she said, no, I don't. And so I'm going, oh, wow, this is kind of interesting. I thought maybe she'd pick up on this. And I said, well, I think the solution to your problem is you need to get a hamster. And she said, I've actually never seen a hamster before. And I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. She has this metaphor of being in a hamster wheel, but she's never actually seen a hamster and doesn't know how a hamster wheel works. So I said, well, do you have any other ideas about what might be keeping this thing moving? And she said, no, I just have a sense it's hidden under those wood shavings somewhere. And I said, well, there's one thing that I know is hidden under those wood shavings. And there's one thing that I know that you know is hidden under those wood shavings. And that's your own feet. And she slapped the sides of her chair and said, oh my God, how did I not see that? To which I said, well, there were wood shavings there. First time that she had recognized in that unconscious right brain experiential mode that she was indeed creating this herself, even though those were the words she told me when she first walked in the door. Now she got it where it needed to happen. And so I said, some people, they have issues because they don't know what step to take next. Sometimes people have a lot of steps and it's overwhelming. Some people don't even know what direction to go in or how many steps are required. So some people don't know the first step to take. But in your case, you're taking too many steps. And what you need to do is just take fewer steps. So close your eyes and just notice what happens when you take fewer steps. And you could see that she was relaxing. And she said, the wheel stopped. And then she said, now actually, because it stopped, I can step off of it. And that's actually fairly easy to do. And that's where we close the session. And interestingly, what she reported back later when we met several weeks and then had some follow-up after that, I think our first meeting was 2 or 3 weeks later. And she said, it's interesting. First of all, her blood pressure was no longer spiking. Her blood pressure came down. So that was a very physical evidence of the change that this allowed her to make. But she also said that her life had actually gotten busier during those 3 weeks. And yet she was able to handle that in a whole different way. So I want to first caution you all that with this metaphor work, very much of the time, there's not such an easy, simple solution. And that's not the point of it either, to have a simple solution. But it is a dramatic example of how accessing a metaphor can tune us into an aspect of our experience where we can get a shift that needs to happen in a whole different way, even if we already have the conscious mind understanding of that before the session. So I'm curious, for those of you who shared your metaphors and those of you who might be finding out more about your metaphors already and thinking about it now, maybe Barbara, maybe you figured out what it's like, the thing that's pulling you around, or let's see, I think it was Steve who also had something pulling back, what that's like. So I'm curious, for how many of you, just what we've done so far, just beginning to elicit a metaphor, began to bring some sort of insight that you didn't have before? It's not going to be everybody, but maybe just show visually a raise of hands. Okay, so I see a number of people, and then of course we have people without their videos on. Okay, so quite a few actually. So I think I saw about 7 hands raised of the videos that are turned on. So that's quite an interesting thing, is that, and we haven't even gone even sort of begun to do the full process that we'll be learning in the 4 days. But isn't it interesting that just tuning into the beginning of a metaphor can sometimes bring some really interesting insights? It reminds me of a metaphor. We sent this out in an email, so some of you may have gotten it. A metaphor from my father, where he had an agreement with somebody and that it wasn't followed through on. And for him, the metaphor was like a rug being pulled out from under him. And he said, yeah, I'm somebody who stands on my agreements. And his agreements were really important to him. That was a really important value for him, to stand on his agreements. And he's, yeah, I stand on my agreements. And my mother was exploring this with him and asked him, well, what would it be like to stand by your agreement? At first, he didn't want to do it, but when he tried it out, he goes, oh, that's actually a lot better. It puts me in a much more grounded and stable position if somebody else just pulls that away. So it's interesting how much we can, or how insights can start to develop even just from being aware of a little bit of the metaphor, even if we don't have the full metaphorical landscape that we learn to access in the training. So not only what it's like kind of directly, but what's to the left, what's to the right, what's in front, what's back. In this case, this one, I was in a room, and it was like a padded room. You know, like those places you go where, I don't know what they're called, but it's just full of like toys and trampolines and pillows, and it's like a place where kids can go and just like have like the best time ever. It was a room like that everywhere except for underneath me where the spikes were, and I was, strung up by my head. So that was when we elicited the full landscape of what's to the left, what's to the right, what's in front, what's behind, what's up. When we elicit the full metaphorical landscape, then there's much more insight that comes in, and much more idioms that we can bring to the situation, and just a lot we can start to learn about what's keeping us stuck and what might actually work better as a solution. So would anyone like to share some of the insight that you got just from eliciting so far, even without doing any idioms or any further elicitation? And just go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, Carol. Yeah.
So unmute myself. There we go. Yes, I have trouble accessing my emotions. And with this metaphor, I started to feel anxiety, which I'd never let myself feel before. So that's new.
Oh, interesting. Great. Thanks for sharing. So more access to emotions. Anyone else want to share what kind of insight came just from eliciting the beginning? Yeah, Joe.
So I had that metaphor of being mired, feet stuck in like a molasses kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's it. The thing that comes to me with that is a sense of I always do the same thing. I have this inertia that holds me back from making progress, trying something new, or pushing, I don't know, getting off the ground even. Oh my God, there you go. Because I'm gonna have to get off the ground to get over that wall.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, great. One of the things we'll be learning in the training is the different metaphorical taxonomies, or different categories of metaphor that have a lot of interesting things about them. So one of them is obstructions. That's a common thing that comes up. There's also containers, which mine is an example of being in a container. And in this room, there's Hertz metaphors where there's, and here we have a potential for a hurt metaphor. That's, if somebody cut that rope, then there'd be a Hertz metaphor there. There'd be an impaling of some sort. There's all these different types of categories of metaphor that are really interesting and we'll be going into depth about. But with obstructions, one of the interesting things to explore, like Joe, for you, how wide is the wall?
That's an excellent question. Like 30 feet wide, maybe about 10 feet high, concrete, about 8 inches thick.
Okay, great. Awesome. Yeah, and so we can learn a little bit about different strategies too for movement in life and for achieving goals. We'll learn how goals are represented in metaphor. but one of the interesting thing is that, you know, some people, when they face an obstacle, they just want to break through it. They're going for a breakthrough. And that requires a lot of endurance. Sometimes the obstacle is going to be too thick, no matter how much endurance you have. And that strategy may not work very well in all situations. But in some, it might work really well. Others, Joe mentioned getting over it. So getting over an obstacle is about ability and raising your ability to be able to overcome something, get over something. And you hear this in language all the time. Yeah, so another strategy is, you know, I don't want to spill the beans on this one, but what about just going around it? Or just going about this in a different situation, in a different way?
Well, so when it comes to the wall, I do need to get over it. I understand that it's that kind of blockade could be gotten around, but getting over it is a turn of phrase that particularly pertains to crap that's holding me down. Like getting over the past, getting over the fear, getting over the anxiety, getting over it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So it's something to explore is these different directions. And so what I'd invite you, Joe, to just kind of explore on your own after this is just see what would it be like to, if you were to take a different route. It may not be the right route, and we don't know what the rest of the landscape is here. You know,
right.
There could be a pack of lions over here and something else on the other side of the wall. So this process is also not at all about me as a guide giving advice of what to do, but it's about gaining insight into the landscape so that we can recognize what are the possibilities there and explore the different possibilities.
Okay.
Because sometimes going around something is just a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
Some people like to dig down to the bottom and get to the root of the issue, right? So that's about analysis. Going around, that's about avoidance. So there's these different strategies. And it is an interesting thing. It brings up this other metaphor of somebody who had this path that they were on, and there was a bunch of barbed wire, but it was only across the path. And this was somebody that my mother worked with, but this kind of thing happens all the time. You know, it might be a brick wall, it might be something else. And when she asked him, do you have any other thoughts about how you might approach this? He said, no, I have no idea how to get past this obstacle. It's all barbed wire. You can't go through it. And it's across the path. So he was somebody who doesn't deviate from the path.
Mm.
And so you can start to deliver some of these metaphors, and it can just bring a lot of insight to somebody about how they approach and whether that approach is going to be a fit for this particular situation. Probably not deviating from the path has been a very good strategy for him for a long time. He was a very successful person. But in this case, it might not be the way to go. Anyone else who shared a metaphor, would you like to share anything just about your experience, or if you gained any insight, even without delivering any idioms or anything more? Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, I actually did a little doodle myself, and I realized that it wasn't, I had written down like looping, pulled back, can't let go, but the rope was holding me back.
Okay, so there's a rope. It's like a rope.
Something like that.
Yeah. How is it holding you back?
I don't know. My drawing isn't very good. It's just a stick figure. Oh,
it doesn't matter about the drawing, but you can just notice in your experience, something to check on is how is this rope holding you back? It reminds me, and so these are attachment metaphors. That's another one of those taxonomies I was mentioning. There's somebody in the training who he was being held back by, it was like a giant fish hook through his back. And it was a big rope going back. And when we asked, so what's on the other side of that rope? He said, my family. And so that was an interesting thing because his experience was that his family was holding him back. And it really hurt too. So it was a hurt, it's both a hurt metaphor and an attachment metaphor. And so the interesting thing then was saying, well, you know, it seems to you from your perspective like you're being held back by your family. What if this is your way of using your pain to drag your family wherever you want to go? And that was like, whoa, that's a different way of looking at it. So there's a lot of these just really fascinating things that happen with these metaphors where you can, because of the structure of the metaphor, this is what it's like. It's a state where we can be receptive to that kind of feedback and look at it and go, wow, I think there's truth to that actually, because that is literally true of the metaphor. If we were just having a conversation, I said, you know what, I think you use your pain to drag your family, you know, to just kind of keep your family dragging along behind you everywhere you want to go. What do you think the response would be to that? That would go nowhere, right? But when we've elicited a metaphor and it matches that experience, it's amazing how people go, wow. And it's not insulting, it's like deeply validating and can bring a lot of insight to letting them decide what to do next and what feels like the direction to go or the way to approach their next steps. Was that, Terry, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I watched you in a video earlier today, and so I did my own little metaphor. I drew it, and it was about, I have 2 adult sons, and they're not doing quite well in life right now. They've got some pretty good challenges, and so it keeps me depressed sometimes. And so so I drew this great big old dust cloud, really a dark, big old dust cloud. And on the other side of it was the ocean and the sun and all of that. But me and my sons were in this dust cloud like a tornado, you know, just kind of flying around. And so I asked myself, you know, what do I need to do to feel better? What would make me feel better? And of course, it was to pull myself out of that and take me over to the right side, out of the cloud, and with a lounge chair where I could see this, you know, the ocean and the sun and like and the blue sky and all of that. And they were still over here, you know, flying around, but I was over here, and I could. Although at first my lounge chair was pointed in the direction of the cloud, and I thought, that doesn't quite feel completely good. And so I had to rearrange so that my lounge chair was facing the ocean. And, you know, so I was like, yeah. And, but you know, I knew all of that on a cognitive basis, you know, the codependency stuff and all of that, you know. So cognitively, I knew that that's what I needed to do. But what was interesting, I thought, was that with that new picture, it just felt so freeing. I could actually feel like for once, you know, what it would be like if I would actually do that. You know, breathing was so much easier, and it was so much, you know, it just felt so much better.
Oh, great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some idioms with that is that basically you've been in a negative atmosphere for a long time. And it's been an atmosphere that's prevented you from, it's darkened things and really prevented you from seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah. And needing to just focus on my own stuff and allowing them to figure out their own problems.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's been in the middle of a bit of a storm too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Any other thoughts on any of these idioms for any of these metaphors? There's, you know, both of these people are looking forward to things. I already mentioned, you know, with this devil that let's see, I don't know if I drew that correctly. This is the right side. So the devil is more right than she is, which is interesting. And there's a whole ocean of possibility left for her. Nodding along. Yeah, do you want to share something, Andrea?
Yeah, yeah. So as I was listening to that and thinking about the oceans of possibility, I also wondered if the devil's in the detail.
It might be. And of course, there's so many more idioms that we can find to match once we elicit the whole landscape. With just this little bit, sometimes there are some that really work, like negative atmosphere, looking forward to certain things. This person's not looking forward to anything, or at least they're not able to see what they look forward to. And really, no matter what direction they turn, they're not able to see what's right in front of them. So, okay, I see some nodding along, right? So it's an interesting thing. And I hope you come to the training and I know some of you have already been through it, but it's quite an impactful experience once you have a full metaphor elicited and start having some of these idioms. What is an idiom after all? It's a culturally appropriate metaphor. So it's like this bridge between the two hemispheres, between the dominant logical talking part of ourselves and the non-dominant experiential, this is what it's like kind of experience that often gets ignored. And so to have this experience of idioms being delivered, these culturally acceptable communications that completely get and understand the non-dominant right brain experiential experience of the problem is quite an interesting thing. So I just want to share really briefly about the training coming up, and then I'll stay on just a little bit longer if anybody has any further questions. So the intro training in Boulder, Colorado is Metaphors of Movement level 1 and 2. So level 1 is 2 days. That's where we learn the full metaphorical elicitation process. And then level 2 is another 2 days where we go even more into depth in these different metaphorical taxonomies and just learning all kinds of stuff. So it's 4 days, January 31 through February 3rd, 2020. So that's a Friday through Monday. And you can find it on andreasnlptrainings.com and click on the metaphor tab and then just select the level 1 and 2 training. Some of you have been to the level 1 and 2. I recommend going through it multiple times. I've been through the basic level training with Andy, the developer, I think 9 or 10 times, and I learn new stuff every time. Because one of the things with these metaphors, you can see how incredibly diverse and different they are. And it's just amazing to see what emerges. So every training is unique in that way. And then we have the advanced training with Andy, of course, coming on later in the spring. That's also on andreasnlptrainings.com. If you sign up for those this month, November, you'll save $100 on each of them. So if you want to sign up for both, that's $200 savings. If you're just taking the intro training that I'll be teaching, then that's $100 savings. So we hope you do that. And it's just a whole lot of fun. We're going to have a lot of fun. So yeah, Steve.
Is doing the drawings an integral part of looking and processing the metaphor?
So it doesn't have to be. The purpose of doing the drawings is to demonstrate that you've got it appropriate. It can be a way to get feedback that you actually understood what was being said, and so you've got the metaphor accurate. But I have done this process many times without any drawing, as long as I'm clear about what the metaphor is. The purpose of doing the drawing is to demonstrate understanding in an additional way, and also have a check that you actually got the metaphor right. Because sometimes you go, okay, so it's like this, and they said, no, actually the wall's it's a lot shorter than that, or then you can learn some things to be sure that when you're offering the idioms, it's going to actually match their experience and not something else.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, Jordan.
So I'm kind of a little fuzzy on like what's the change agent, right? Like so, like in wholeness, you might help someone or invite someone to return to awareness, right? And that sort of facilitates shift. So what for metaphor, is it just seeing the metaphor that's the shift? Is it the idioms? What's the?
So there's a lot of aspects to the full process, which we only just tap the surface at the very beginning of it, that makes the whole thing really powerful. But what I would say the core feature of this way of working is it's a way of getting an experiential sense of where we're starting. As Andy Austin likes to say, come to Metaphors of Movement and learn how horrible things really are. So he's like, yeah, it's hard, it's a tough sell. It's really easy to sell all the great goals and the things you'll achieve and all of that. But the truth is that you need to know where you're starting before you can get somewhere different. So that's what Metaphors is really valuable about, is getting that recognition in your neurology, in your system of like, oh, okay, this is actually where I'm starting. And then from there, it's up to the individual what to do next. But that allows the movement piece to come in of, okay, if I know where I'm starting, now it might be really challenging. It might be difficult. I might not have a lot of options, but these are the different ways that I can position myself or take steps to get somewhere better.
So it's more about getting a good lay of the land.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then maybe you just talk with them about different ways that they can navigate the terrain.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think one of the things that's so valuable about that is that so often people try to jump in and give solutions or advice that worked for them, for their situation, and maybe on the surface level, in reality, they were both divorce situations, let's say. Okay, so one person starts giving all their advice about what worked for them in their divorce and going through that. That may have no relevance to somebody else who's also going through a divorce. But when you access the metaphor, you get insight into, okay, this is really the lay of the land. And now you can develop your own strategy for what's going to really work for you. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions about the training, or just questions about this process in general?
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. So welcome. Did somebody else have one other comment or question?
I have a question about the training.
Yeah, great.
Being a right-brained introvert, it's difficult for me to come up with a metaphor that would be useful. And I would imagine the training would include how to help people who are like me get to their metaphors.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, actually, because in a group-guided scenario like this, where we're just going really fast and going with what comes up, it's very common that a significant number in the group will go, I have no idea what it's like, or, I just know what the problem is, but I don't get this whole what's it like thing.
Right.
So we will go into that and ways to make that easier.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you all so much for being here. It's always a pleasure. I love this way of working. I think it's just a lot of fun as well as valuable. And I think that's a pretty awesome combination. So I always enjoy sharing this material. Thanks so much for participating and sharing some of your metaphors and insights, even just with this little dipping our toe into the water, so to speak. So I wish you all a wonderful evening, and feel free to contact me by email too if you have any other further questions come up. You can find that on my website, which is markandreas.com, and just shoot me over any emails, any questions you have about the level 1 and 2 training. All right, so this is where we say goodbye. Thank so much. Good to see a lot of
Thank you.
faces. Take care. Have a good night.